Hey guys, I'm Annie Allen, a certified divorce coach and RCSD divorce realtor, and your host for the Starting Over Stronger podcast, the show that's all about bringing you the practical professional help you need as you divorce and the hope that you can then create a life you'll love. I don't skim the surface around here. If you want to dive deep into the wholehearted wisdom of how to have a better divorce experience than everyone else you know by changing what you do, then this is the podcast for you. After a lifetime in dysfunctional relationships with those closest to me and over a decade in recovery, I'm ready to share everything I've learned and everything I'm still learning, because I believe the keys to having a better divorce experience and better relationships to come should never be a secret. Here, you'll find episodes that offer enlightening and unconventional wisdom that is both actionable and sometimes even fun, like friends chatting over coffee. So come be a fly on the wall for these amazing conversations that will give you a fresh, honest look at how you can divorce well and then live well. If you're ready to do divorce differently, Starting Over Stronger is all about you deciding, surviving, and then thriving through and after your divorce. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Starting Over Stronger show, where you'll find help and hope for your divorce survival and recovery. Divorce well, live well.
It is not at all uncommon for divorce, especially high conflict divorce, and codependency to go hand in hand. My personal journey out of codependency began many years before I realized divorce was going to be the only way to free myself from my toxic relationship that I had known pretty much my whole life. I had no idea then what I can clearly see now, that my divorce was part of what was going to help fully heal my codependency. Today on the show, I will be having a conversation with licensed professional counselor Krystal Shipps of Mended Living. She's a therapist and health coach who's knowledgeable and passionate about overcoming codependency. Welcome to the show, Krystal.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am a licensed professional counselor. I practice in Kansas and Missouri. I am also a dating coach and a life coach, and I'm very passionate about healing mentally, physically, and I believe that codependency is one of the main things that I see in my therapy sessions. It's very common, and it's definitely something that a lot of people struggle with, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Well, thank you. I'm excited to delve into this conversation with you for that very reason. I think so many people struggle with it, and oftentimes, I don't know what the statistics are, but I would say a whole lot of people just really don't even know that it's such a big issue for them, or know what it is even. So I really hope to be able to shed a lot of light on that today for people. So I know that you and I both have a lot of experience with this topic. For me, it's a lot of personal experience and some professional. So Krystal, as we talk through this, your viewpoint as a therapist on these issues will be very valuable for listeners. And for that reason, if you don't mind, I'd like to know if this is something that you have experience with personally also, or just professionally.
Oh, yes. I am a reformed people pleaser in recovery, I say. And I was raised to be polite and sweet and nice, and to never have really any anger or a voice or an opinion that was outside of the lines. Mm-hmm. And I'm 43 now. And I think when I turned 40, I think a switch flipped for me. And I just realized, you know what? Life is too short. I have to be able to be authentic and show up in the world how I feel good about. Mm-hmm. And so, but it's a daily struggle for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm glad to know that. And I think that just helps the listeners to be able to relate to you more. So thank you for sharing that. I know for me, I didn't even ever see a counselor until around the age of 30. I was about 10 years into my marriage, and it took a considerable amount of time for me to really understand all the levels of abuse and toxicity around me and in me, and the toll that those had taken on me, as in, codependency, really. Childhood physical and emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, and then eventually emotional, verbal, and even some financial abuse in my marriage. And it took me years to come to the place that I was able to see my role in all of these unhealthy situations, and ultimately to understand that they all happened as a result of the way that I was brought up. And it was then and only then that I began to change the one thing I had control over, which was me. And the Serenity Prayer is a tool that I used and still use that, became more or less a theme for my life. I recited it all the time. I printed it. I put it everywhere. Honestly, I still do. And it's one of the things that I've written and recorded as an affirmation on my ThinkUp app, which, if you don't know about that, listeners, you should check it out. It's a very handy app for codependent people, as well as really anyone who just needs to rewrite all the bad scripts that they have in their head. So it's a really neat way of doing it. And it's the thing about the Serenity Prayer that I think is really interesting is that most people only know the first part of it. They don't know that it's longer than that. And the other thing that's interesting to me is that even if you're not a Christian, this is a concept that just works for anybody, really. If you you can think about how to apply this, whatever your spiritual beliefs are. And the complete version of the Serenity Prayer goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And then the rest of it that most people don't know is living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, and trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever and ever in the next. And I think there's just so much in that. I mean, it would take a whole episode just to unpack that, but I think that it's so pertinent for just the whole concept of overcoming codependency, because it's all about letting go of what you can't control and embracing and challenging yourself to unravel what you can, right?
Absolutely.
Do you have anything like that you cling to or think about to empower you when you struggle with these thoughts?
Absolutely. When I teach boundaries, which I think boundaries and codependency are siblings, they have to be in place in order for healing. When I teach boundaries, I teach it as having a hula hoop around you. And you're only responsible for what's in your hula hoop. Your words, your actions, your behaviors, your values, your time, your money, your energy, your effort. We can't be up in other people's hula hoops saying what they should or shouldn't be doing. And when we can really rein that in and say, you know what, I'm just responsible first and foremost for me, it starts to kind of break that codependency chain. I can't be responsible for my spouse's behavior. I can't be responsible for, especially if it's abusive. And to me, it's always, hey, okay, that's not my hula hoop. That's not something that I have to worry about. And I use that analogy a lot with clients.
That's good. I like that. There's also a powerful Ernest Hemingway quote that says, the most painful thing is losing yourself in the process of loving someone too much and forgetting that you are special too. And I think that could be the definition of codependency.
For sure.
How would you define codependency, though, for those that have no idea what we're talking about?
I say codependency in a nutshell just means I can only be okay if everyone around me is okay.
That's good.
And if someone around me has a problem or doesn't like me or is uncomfortable or is hungry or is tired, then that's obviously my problem. Well, that's really not our problem. In a relationship, it's the same. I can only be okay if my partner's okay. We aren't able to let them experience the full range of human emotions like anger, disappointment, hurt, upset, loneliness, only happy and all the time. And then we will throw ourselves under the bus if we need to in order to maintain that.
Very true.
That's how I define it.
And another framework that I provide for my clients with regard to just kind of trying to help people understand codependency is looking at all the different types of dependencies. I see there being 4. And so I want to just kind of talk through that. I know for sure that changing my codependent behavior caused everything else eventually to fall into place in the ways that it needed to. And that is in fact still the case. I mean, things are still falling into place. Life is a journey, not a destination, right? So, this isn't something that you ever really arrive at, but you just get better and better at it all the time. It's kind of an unraveling. And so I think one way that to frame it is to look at these dependencies, and they are dependence, independence, codependence, and interdependence. And so let's just talk a little bit about each one. Dependence is, when you're a child or a senior citizen or a disabled person who can't live alone, you have to rely heavily on someone or entirely on someone for your most basic needs to be met, right? I mean, what else would you say about being dependent?
I would say probably the thing that I notice the most is when parents still feel that their 20-year-old is dependent, right? It's that shift. The shift doesn't happen from dependence to independence because the parent won't let it. Right. So I see that the most, like, oh, my child can't make their own doctor's appointments. Well, of course they can if they're forced to, right? Yeah. So not knowing when you should kind of rein back on that.
Good point.
Yeah.
And another one would be, putting yourself, or, it just happens over time. I guess it's not really you putting yourself there, but, a woman who's, dependent on her spouse, and that could be in a lot of different ways, financially, emotionally, spiritually, and then, we'll get into when we talk about the other types of dependence, why that's not healthy. And, because it's true that in some ways in a healthy relationship, we depend on one another, but it's a little bit of a different angle on it that we'll talk about when we get to interdependence. But independence, obviously, being an adult who does life on their own, they're single or they're in a dysfunctional relationship that operates like a single person. And this person, does everything for basic living without anyone's input or assistance. So, and there's not necessarily anything unhealthy or healthy per se, I guess, about independence. It's just that there comes a time in our lives, and typically in America anyway, we kind of view that time as 18, but that's probably different in different places around the world and in different cultures and things. But at some level in those adolescent years, we become more and more independent, and that is a good and healthy thing. And when that doesn't happen, it causes a struggle for anybody involved in those relationships that are staying dependent for too long, right?
You bet. And I also see sometimes in a relationship, a long-term relationship or marriage, there's an independent partner and a dependent partner. So the independent partner may be the husband who goes out and works all day or travels a lot for business, takes trips alone. And then the woman who has put herself, as you said, in that dependent role, like, oh, I don't know anything about the bills. I don't know where the money is going. And that's safer for her. Maybe that's what she saw modeled with her mom and dad. And so we almost in a marriage have an independent and a dependent partner, which causes that power differential.
Yes. Yeah. It's an imbalance. And that's a really good point. Yeah. And honestly, it reminds me of the fact that, any really adult relationship, marriage, friendship, work, whatever, should be an adult to adult relationship. And in relationships like what you just described, like my former marriage, where you have an independent person and a dependent person, it really is more of a parent-child relationship.
Yeah.
And it truly causes so many of the issues that often lead to divorce because it's just not the way that the marriage relationship is supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that, I guess, kind of leads us to codependence, which is where someone who should more or less be independent, an adult who still depends on another adult, even though they're capable of contributing equally in the relationship. And for whatever reason, whether that's emotional or if there's addiction or, there's probably a whole lot of different reasons that we'll probably get into a little bit more later as to why someone becomes codependent. But codependency is just, it always reminds me of that old song, I need you to need me. I want you to want.
Yes.
That's like,
I hate that song.
I always say that's like the theme song of codependency. If you don't understand codependency, just go listen to that song and you'll understand.
And I'm sure Cheap Trick wasn't intending for it to be that way when they put it out, but it definitely has.
Who knows? Yeah. The writer probably was codependent. I don't know. Who knows? There's so many of us out there, but then ultimately the goal is interdependence, which is where an adult or two adults in this case are both capable of being independent. They more or less have facets of their life that they operate independently, their work or maybe friendships and family and different things, but who choose to execute a strong balance between dependence and independence by doing what they need to be doing to be responsible parties in the relationship, emotionally, financially, and so forth, and in the world, but they rely on one another in appropriate ways to show love and care and support. What thoughts do you have about interdependent?
I think that, of course, it's the gold standard, as you said. Going back to codependence, I feel like sometimes codependence looks like learned helplessness. It's maybe they came together and they were interdependent, and then over time it just became easier to not try as hard, or to maybe the man or the woman did their own laundry before, and then when they get into the relationship they're like, you know what, they'll do it for me. It's that I used to be independent, and now we're interdependent, and then we'd slip into codependency because it's just years and years of just deciding not to step up. Right.
Good point.
And so I think that interdependence is, like I said, it's what we're striving for. But it can be a slippery slope. Right. When one person especially comes in with some trauma, maybe, and realizes that by being needed, they're getting their love tank filled, the other person could slip into dependence, or being able to just back off and say, I don't have to step up in this way. Two people who are both willing to step up, I think is what everyone should.
And I think that's absolutely right. It's definitely something that's very insidious. People have no idea they're doing something unhealthy. It's just all they've ever known. It's just how they live. So one of the things we want to kind of get into now is how codependency happens. And I think there's a logical misconception about it, that it's kind of the same thing as being a caregiver or a caretaker. So can you help us differentiate how codependency is basically a dysfunctional servient relationship where you support or enable another person at the expense of taking care of your own needs, and how that usually looks as compared with healthy caregiving?
Sure. I do think that sometimes it happens over time, and whereas one person might be naturally more predisposed to being a nurturer or a caregiver just by personality type, over time, that looks like, well, now I'm on the back burner, and I've actually intentionally put myself on the back burner, whether it's some kind of martyr complex, whether that's what their mom did or their dad did. It was never about mom. It was never about dad. I read a story once about a mom who had a bright red ball gown that she had tucked in the back of her closet and had never worn it, still had the tags on it. And there were a few times over her life that she thought, I could wear that, but it's just not that important. I don't want to draw attention. I don't want it to be about me. And then over time, the dress got eaten by moths, and they never got to experience it. So I think it can be, especially, I think there's a shift when people become parents.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this child needs me for everything. And if both parents are not actively involved, it can really, really turn into codependency quickly. I just think that back burner analogy comes into play a lot.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it is by no means a uniquely female struggle. Men are just as codependent, but women do tend to be raised to be caregivers and nurturers. So I think it's probably a little bit easier for them to slip from that well-rounded, strong, independent woman to the caring woman and wife and mom, who then just sort of naturally slides into that dysfunction of codependency. Right. So,
right.
Would you say that relationships where one partner struggles with drug addiction, alcoholism, gambling, abuse, or personality disorder even, that the likelihood of codependency increases? And if so, why and how?
I think that it can. I think part of the where it's kind of maybe upticks is the fear of other people thinking that the family is dysfunctional. Reputation, needing to keep up appearances, as to not lose a job and income. Yeah. Also not wanting to change the dynamic by divorcing is sometimes the path of least resistance, right? Especially if there's cultural or religious expectations to stay together. Yeah. So these can be extremely powerful motivators to let that codependent dynamic continue over time. It's like this hurt is more easily absorbed than the hurt of change.
Well, yeah, like what the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for sure, that's a chronic and ongoing issue for most of my clients, that they stayed longer than they should have, could have, would have, because of and there's cultural or mostly spiritual expectations of themselves and from others.
And there's some shame in that too. Like, why have I let myself do this? What's wrong with me that I'm allowing this behavior? And that shame spiral keeps people trapped for so long.
Yeah. Well, probably several weeks back, once this actually airs, we had an episode on shame where I interviewed Dr. Ann Morgan on it. And we talked through that whole issue surrounding divorce and how to overcome that. So it's just like codependency. It's very deep and very insidious and not easily and effortlessly, overcome. It takes work to work through it. So I know for me, even with the issues on the other side of the aisle, I know that my codependent behavior came before my marriage. It was rooted in my childhood experience with my nuclear family, that I would guess is the case for anyone who grew up with addiction, abuse, alcoholism, mental illness, personality disorder, maybe even if one of their parents died when they were little or something, right?
Yeah, I know for me, I was raised in a home with my dad has bipolar disorder and was pretty tumultuous at times. And I feel like I just needed to be okay so I wouldn't cause more problems. Right. And so that needing to be okay, needing to control my environment as much as I could, that's where that people pleasing took root. If something was wrong with me and I don't have to share it, then I don't have to make the family worse off. I took way too much of that onto myself as a child. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people do. I mean, it's a story I hear over and over again in different forms. So, and I think what it is these conditions create a void that an empathic child, or maybe any child, is naturally going to try to fill or be relied upon to fill or expected to fill, whether they want to or not. And it's sad when child innocence is stolen like that, but it often results in this kind of learned codependent behavior or helplessness, which I think then sets us up to pick people that need us and that we can fix. And we attract partners to us who want to be taken care of, right?
Yeah. I think it would take a very strong, self-aware and emotionally resilient person to endure a situation like that and not grow up with issues with self-worth and codependency. Yeah. I mean, there's a very powerful emotional payoff to feeling valued, especially if you never have before. I mean, it's almost an addiction. It's almost that, finally I'm chosen. Someone needs me. I have a value. It's a high. Right. And I think sometimes that's what helps that behavior continue.
I agree. I think it's as natural as water flowing down gravity. It just happens.
For sure.
I don't, honestly, I'd have to think about it. I don't even know, would it be possible for somebody to grow up in that kind of an atmosphere and not have that struggle? I mean, I can't imagine.
Yeah. The only way I could see that is if they had just really, really powerful, positive support in other areas of their life, teacher, coach, mentor. by aunt or uncle, pouring into them constantly, balancing that deficit. But a lot of times in these systems, that's just not happening.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So let that be a reminder to anybody, or encouragement to anybody listening that plays one of those roles as a teacher or a coach or someone, that knows they're having an effect in someone's life whose home life may not be so great. That's the kind of difference you can make. Absolutely. And I agree with that completely. So I thought we'd just kind of bullet list some things like, if we want to call these like the symptoms of codependency, I call it what my life was like before, because this is just me. I'm just talking about myself. So you can interject any thoughts you have about yourself or your clients as well. So I know that I put others' needs before my own, and that was to both mine and their detriment. I didn't take care of myself well.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree with that totally. I think I was modeled that behavior as, it doesn't matter about me. I'm not that important. It's just about others in the family. I also think I'm divorced myself, and my first marriage was a marriage of this person needs me. It's not about what I need. It's not about what's good for me. And so, I've definitely been there myself.
Yeah. And I hate to admit it, but I know that I also tried to control. I was controlling in some ways in an attempt to make things okay, to try to keep things from escalating on the emotional roller coaster that we lived on.
Absolutely.
So, that's a hard one to admit for a lot of people, because usually when you think of control, you think of that person that's narcissistic and mean and, just overbearing. And you don't want to think of yourself as also controlling, because you're more or less the victim in that situation. But it is true that it's a natural thing to try to gain some kind of control or power in your life, and it comes out in a negative way.
I think control is also a response to needing to feel safe. And if I can control and manipulate the environment around me, then I can feel safe. And it's a constant grasping at straws for that. And then that safety wound was what we're trying to heal from childhood. Yeah.
And I gained a lot of satisfaction from feeling needed and relied upon. And I have to imagine that to some degree that's normal and healthy to feel that, but at some point it crosses a line. What are your thoughts on that?
I feel like for me, as a child, being competent, being smart, being capable, those were the things that made me feel the best. When I was, top of the class, or when I got my paper done first, or when I got an A+, And so I transferred that into, especially my first marriage, where it was like, if I can control and be good at everything and be competent at everything and be enough, then I have value. And that's just a self-worth deficit of my value is only based on what I can contribute, what I can fix, what I can solve. And I had to, like I said, just in the last few years, realize my worth is not contingent upon what I contribute. My worth is intrinsic, and it has been there from day one.
Yeah, I like that. Sponsorship for today's show is provided by family law attorney Mandy Rowan Pingle. Attorney Mandy Pingle is one of Starting Over Stronger's preferred referral partners because of her passion and integrity with her clients. She handles complicated custody, high asset and difficult asset divorce cases, military family law cases, which she spoke about on an episode in season 1, and child custody cases involving abuse, neglect, special needs, and other unique family issues. In season 2 of the show, she appeared again to share her unique and important insights on how to select an attorney you will love. And I love referring my Kansas City divorce coaching clients to Mandy Pingle. So if you are in Jackson or Clay County in Missouri or Johnson County, Kansas, and you're facing a difficult or unique divorce situation, you can connect with her at www.kansascityfamilylaw.com or her new office number at 816-683-9595. Please tell her that you heard about her on Starting Over Stronger. Well, another thing that I did was I enabled my former partner's unhealthy behaviors by absorbing his consequences that he should have had to feel, and that he caused by denying and excusing his actions to myself and others, like our kids. And I tried to buffer the relationships that his behavior was harmful to. And the thing that this always reminds me of is this story that when my daughter was somewhere around 9 years old, I think, I remember tucking her into bed one night. There'd been some, big uproar in the house that evening that was, I don't remember the details, to be honest with you. I just know there was a big argument. And, so I was tucking her into bed and she said, why does he get to act like that? But I get in trouble when I throw temper tantrums. And I was just like, oh, that was like such a gut punch. Like I will never forget that as long as I live. I mean, she's 23 now and she was 9 then. And I still remember it like it was yesterday. And just the feeling that it gave me of what am I doing? Why, why is this okay for, and I don't even remember what I said to her. I think I probably said something like, well, he's just had a stressful day at work and, we just need to show him grace. And, and I'm sure she's thinking, why don't I get grace?
Right.
When I misbehave.
I hear that so much with clients of, well, kids, daddy's drinking because he had a long day. Or in a marriage, somebody would say, well, she's cheating because I'm not a good husband. Yeah. It's not letting that person have the consequences of the behavior. And I'm a big fan of natural consequences, parenting and just in adult behavior too. So that's absolutely true.
Yeah. And I wasn't raised with healthy boundaries, so I had no idea what they were. I'd never even heard the word boundaries until I was in my mid-30s, maybe. And I certainly didn't know what they were or how to set them or how to hold them in place when they're being challenged. I'm still learning that, honestly, and I'm 47 now. So
yes,
it takes time to figure it out. But, when you don't have those role models growing up, it's even harder.
Yeah. What I see is, those boundaries being, I'm not aware that I get to ask for what I need. And then even underneath that of, I'm not aware that I get to have needs. Yeah. Right. And for really severe, strong codependence, when we're working through this in therapy, I don't even know who I am or what I need anymore. And it's the healing process of finding that out. Like, we know what we don't want. We know what those boundaries are, but we don't even know what we need or what we want anymore. So that's that healing process. That
is one of the most common phrases that are uttered when I first start working with a divorce coaching client is, I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know what I want. I remember early on after my divorce being asked something about what's my favorite food. And immediately I thought of my ex's favorite food. And then I thought, wait a second, is that actually my favorite food? I mean, I like it, but let me think about that. Like, I really actually had to stop and think, what do I like? Wait, actually, I mean, I like barbecue, but really, I actually like Mediterranean food better, like Greek food.
That reminds me
of this weird thing that happens in your mind where you're like, wait a second, what are my thoughts, not other people's thoughts?
That reminds me of that movie Runaway Bride. Julie Roberts' character she would always order her eggs. However, her boyfriend at the time ordered his. And then at the end scene, she's sitting in a restaurant by herself with like 12 different types of eggs, like deciding what she really liked best. Right.
That's awesome.
And so, she's like on the road to breaking that. It doesn't matter what I like. It's just easier. Yeah. So I always love that scene.
You're right. Yeah, that's good. And, the other thing is when you're just starting to learn boundaries, you're really bad at it. So when I first understood what boundaries were and tried to enforce them, I would shut down, get angry, do all kinds of dumb things when my boundaries were violated, but I didn't back my words up with actions, so there wasn't any follow through on the boundaries. So of course, nothing changed because like I tell my clients all the time, actions, not words. Your words mean absolutely nothing to your toxic partner. Your words have been said so many times that they don't believe them. I don't think you even believe them. So stop saying anything and just start doing things different. But that takes a long time to figure out.
It does. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't bring up the fact that changing the dynamic of codependency, setting healthy boundaries, it's a turbulent ride.
Oh, yeah.
Like the other person is not going to be like, you know what, I'm really proud of you.
Yeah.
Like, this is great for you. No. They're going to buck up against it because it changes their life. It makes them have to step up. So, we're not saying this is all going to be sunshine and roses path.
No.
But
it's a great litmus test though, right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
If you are in a healthy relationship that's just struggling, and you learn your own codependency and you start to have good boundaries, your partner is going to respond in some ways like what you just said.
Yes.
I'm struggling with this, but I'm also, this is good. I'm proud of you. This is, this is a change we need. Yes. There's going to be some level of positivity to this fact, but if they are in fact toxic or someone that's not at all happy with your boundaries, then that's, like I said, that's a pretty good litmus test for whether or not there's hope for change in this marriage.
Absolutely. And I feel like sometimes that realization is really hard. Like, I thought we were in a strong marriage. I thought that they would be supportive, and then realizing, oh no, it's absolutely not that.
Yeah, exactly. And, we've talked about this a little bit. I saw the world from his perspective, even considering his reactions and preferences before my own, until I didn't even know who I was anymore or what I liked, because I thought of my life in terms of him.
I think this is a little bit romanticized sometimes, especially when we're younger. Like, oh, I'm going to meet someone and they're going to like hiking just like me. And, and then you realize like one day you're like, I'm sitting maybe at a NASCAR event and I don't even like this. Why? How did I get here? It's a little bit romanticized of the becoming one, right? Yeah. That in reality, as we know, that's losing yourself, and it's very unhealthy.
Yeah. It's saying yes when you want to say no, smiling when you're not happy, basically doing whatever you have to do to keep the peace, which ironically means you never have any peace.
Yes.
We call it keeping the peace.
You're on the side, you're popping your Xanax in order to keep your, the facade up. Yeah. But after, that's just not sustainable. Having that represented, that double life. It's a killer.
I think one really strong symptom of mine was I felt extreme shame when I would make a mistake. And to some degree, some of that was probably from my childhood. Some of it was, the person I was married to would shame and, just criticize everything that I did. And so it just made me hyper aware, hyper conscious of making mistakes and just super, super embarrassed about it. And, there's a lot of layers to that. So I can't say it's like all his fault or anything. It's just, it's part of my makeup, part of my upbringing. And then it just continued to get worse the more the codependency got worse, I guess.
And truly, I mean, I talk this with my clients a lot, the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is, I'm a good person, but I did a bad thing or I made a mistake. Shame is, I'm a bad person and I did a bad thing, right? A lot of codependents feel that shame. They don't have that intrinsic, I'm a good person, I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes, it's spilled milk. I can clean it up.
Yeah.
But a codependent a lot of times feels that shame of, oh, I am such a terrible wife for spilling the milk and wasting that money. And we don't really have it. And there's no good redeeming quality about me.
Yeah.
So guilt can be okay. If you hurt someone and you repair it and guilt motivated you to repair, that's great. Guilt can be used. If you rob a bank, you make reparations and you feel guilty, well, you should feel guilty and you go, serve your time and you're done. Shame is, there is nothing redeemable. Yeah. There is nothing good in me. Yeah. And so many times I see with codependence, that feeling of, I'm just not hitting the bar on any levels.
Yeah. And you hear it in the language, I'm so stupid, or, I'm this or I'm that. Shame is who you are, but guilt is just what you did, and it's like so much deeper when it becomes this thing of who you are rather than just something you did.
Yeah.
So, and I was super uncomfortable with compliments. I can still remember as a grown adult having another adult teach me the concept of accepting a compliment by just saying thank you. And it felt so bad and so awkward. And I was just so uncomfortable with it. It's weird to think back on that now.
And it's really a matter of, you just don't believe it.
Yeah.
You just don't believe it. You know, when I do a self-worth litmus test with a new client, I ask them if they're in a relationship, I said, what do you feel like your partner saw in you? And I can tell you how many times I hear them say, I have no idea. Right. Yeah. And for some people who are in a healthy relationship, they have a healthy self-concept. They're like, well, I'm responsible and I'm funny and I'm, and I'm like, awesome, great. You see it, you see the worth. But so many people out there are just like, it's a mystery. It's a mystery to me how this person could ever see anything in me. And I'm like, okay. And we probably got a codependent on our hands. So yeah.
Good point. Yeah. And, overall, I just generally tied myself in knots internally to behave the way that the demanding person in my life desired. It just was all about that, about people pleasing, like you pointed out early on in our conversation.
Yes. Yeah. And I think people, especially when I work with divorced people or people back in the dating scene, that have been in one of the relationships, like you mentioned, they are not aware of how they have distorted or contorted themselves to mold into what that person wanted. Yeah. And then when it's pointed out, they're like, wow, yeah, that doesn't really seem healthy. One of the things that I try to do when I'm helping a person with codependency is say, what would you say to your best friend who was in this situation?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, well, girl, you need to get out of that. I mean, that's not good for you. Okay. Well, then how come that's not good for you? How come your best friend gets better treatment than you get?
Yeah.
With the compliments, right? Yeah. And with the bending over backwards, being able to give ourselves, self-compassion is crucial in this healing process. So.
Yep, absolutely. It is. And that goes for all the self-talk too, not just the advice, but just, this, like earlier I said that, you hear somebody say, I'm so stupid, because they did something. Would you speak to your best friend like that? I mean, if you do, you're not going to have friends for very long.
Absolutely. And I say too, if somebody was following you around all day long, talking to you the way you talk to yourself, you'd tell them to beat it. Right? Sure. So it's super important to have that positive, affirming, compassionate self-talk.
Yeah. Here's the number one thing I know about codependency. It is exhausting.
Yes.
Seriously. Like, you have no energy, you have no life, you have no brightness in your eyes, no hope for anything. You just exist. It's fruitless. It's thankless. You feel unseen, unacknowledged, unappreciated for anything. I know I spent my life people pleasing. And, especially in my marriage, trying to change him, or at least the relationship, the direction of the relationship. I was unaware for so long that I only had the power to change me, and that was enough to get me going in the right direction and, toward good emotional health. So I can only imagine all of these kinds of things that I've talked about that I felt are things that every codependent experiences. Are there any other major symptoms or things that you see or have thoughts on with that?
Sure. One thing that I see a lot is parents of adult children can also be very codependent. Like, well, it's okay if I can't take a trip because I spent my last dollar on my kid taking a college spring break trip.
Yeah.
My needs aren't as important as their fun, right? And then they resent the fact that their adult kid won't work more than 20 hours a week at GameStop, right? They have to flip the script. They have to realize it's okay for me to say no. It's okay for me to stop paying the phone bill when my child is old enough and capable enough to be taking care of themselves, because that sometimes it's even crumbs of attention. And in fact, the kid calls once a week when they need money, but at least they called.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to continue to meet their supply so I can continue to have that little dangling carrot of a relationship. And I would honestly say I see this dynamic more than I see codependency in romantic relationships in my current practice right now.
Yeah.
And it's just that my role as a parent is my only identity. It's my only hat that I wear. It's the only one that fills me, especially if the marriage isn't great, right? This person's, we're deriving all of their relational filling from their child relationship, and their child is taking every bit of advantage of it.
Yeah.
So honestly, breaking that codependent cycle, I feel like is sometimes even harder.
Yeah.
Because they feel like, well, they're going to think I'm a bad mom. They're going to think I'm mean. And I was like, so and what would be so bad about that, right?
Yeah,
if they were disappointed in you, it's okay. Just being disappointed is part of life.
Yep. Part of life. And, that's an excellent point and really kind of leads toward what we're talking about in the fact that divorce can help to heal codependency, because when you get out of one codependent relationship and then you have like this sense that, oh, okay, I'm free, I'm done with that. And then you start having all the same kinds of other things it's like once you clear that slate, then your brain can go and look at other things differently. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, you're codependent everywhere, not just in your marriage. And so then, it kind of, and so I think that's why divorce does help heal codependency, because it allows you to see that you can have victory over it in one place. And then that empowers you to be able to do the same in your relationship as a parent or as a sibling or as a child, or a coworker.
As an employee. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Your
everywhere.
boss wants you to work every Saturday and you just don't want to have the fight. You don't want to have the, of course, and it can show up in so many different things. I think some of the symptoms, you mentioned the symptoms, resentment, lack of boundaries, anxiety, depression. There can even be GI issues, low self-worth. Your system knows, your body knows something's not right.
Yep.
Insomnia, joint pain, a lot of things, tension. It can look a lot of different ways for different people.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's interesting because whenever you see like a friend or just somebody on social media talking about, I've got insomnia, I can't get rid of it. What do I do? I've tried this and I've tried that. And I've tried that. You're always like their least favorite person when you go, have you looked at your life?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There might be an underlying reason.
Absolutely.
You mentioned GI issues. I've heard the stomach referred to as the second brain. And another thing that I love to use whenever I'm talking about this, I think back to this little teeny bopper novel / movie called The Fault in Our Stars.
Oh, yeah.
There was a line in there that said, pain demands to be felt. And I just, that has stuck with me since I watched that with my preteen daughter.
Yes.
It just, to me, that says, you can pretend like you don't have problems. You can stay in an unhealthy marriage or, unhealthy friendship or parent role or whatever. But that pain is going to come out, and it's going to come out in physical symptoms if you don't let it get resolved emotionally and mentally.
Absolutely. And this looks so much like unhealed trauma in counseling, right? We can think, I'm over it. It doesn't affect me anymore. I'm not with that person. I'm not around that situation. If you haven't processed it, if you haven't healed it, you're still going to feel it somehow. It's going to seep out.
Yeah. So how do you think people generally come to see all of these things as symptoms of a larger issue rather than just thinking this is just who they are? And how do they discover that they can actually change these things?
Sure. A lot of times people, they go to the doctor because they think they have anxiety or they think they're depressed. And they probably are. That's very valid.
Absolutely.
Or they'll come to counseling and they say, well, my husband says that I need to talk to someone, right? Or my mom says I need to talk to someone. They will come, and oftentimes it's under the guise of anxiety and depression. And then we start to dig in a little bit, and it becomes very obvious very quickly, like you said, with some of that self-talk of, well, if I was more competent, if I wasn't so stupid, if I wasn't so, needy, then I wouldn't have anxiety. And I'm like, well, okay, that's the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
The other things are coming before that. That's what's leading to the anxiety. And I think people don't have the word codependency. They don't have, or if they do, it's in a negative connotation, like, oh, well, I don't want to be codependent. That sounds horrible, but people pleasing is okay because other people get to be happy. Right. So they think I'm doing a good thing, or they come with the hula hoop problem of, why won't all these other people in my life just do what they should do? And I think, oh, okay. we are way too wrapped up in what others are doing. Yeah. Because that's all we think about. So that's what it looks like.
And it ultimately comes down to changing yourself And for me, changing me, if listeners, if you're relating to what we're talking about, I hope what you're hearing is that you are fully capable of changing yourself and your circumstances. And that is the hardest, but most important part of healing. So we just want you to know that this healing is a journey. You have to be gentle and kind and compassionate with yourself. And I think that's a big part of it, is not beating yourself up when you start seeing these things. You have always just done what you thought was best. You were trying to love people well and trying to, self-sacrifice in that effort. And, we don't know what we don't know. The unknown until we do, and then it's the known unknown. And, when we know better, we do better. And so I think that what we want to communicate today is to just explore yourself, educate yourself, and then begin to set new actions into place that can then eventually become new patterns that occur in your life. And, our lives, our legacies, our children, and our families deserve for us to find a better way and to make the necessary adjustments to improve all of our lives. And so as we're wrapping up today, I want to ask, if you would, Krystal, just give us a few powerful action steps that will set someone on a healthy course if they're seeing themselves in all of this. How can they pursue healthy independence and interdependence in their relationships?
You bet. Well, first you have to find your voice, and it's that figuring out how you like your eggs, learning about your boundaries, beginning to set those, surrendering the outcome of other people's behavior, right? Allowing them to suffer the consequences of their actions, allowing others to experience painful emotions. Like I said, if you are constantly being the buffer between your kids or your spouse and pain or anger or disappointment or loneliness or frustration, that's a part of the human experience. You are actually hamstringing them at living the entire human experience. You think if I'm a good wife or mom, then my partner or kid will never want for anything. They'll never feel discomfort. I will tell you, as a counselor, these people become awful, miserable adults. People who are never allowed to feel discomfort are miserable to be around. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. And whether that's your spouse, like I said, or your kid, I think that's part of the main work is just what's in my hula hoop, right? But what the other person, if I set a boundary and they're upset about it, it's okay if they're upset. Yeah. Right. It's okay if they're with me, if they're upset with me.
Yeah. And I want to add to that surrendering the outcome of their behavior and allowing them to experience their own consequences isn't mean. And it doesn't have to be done in a mean way. It doesn't mean that when they are suffering the consequences that you go, you deserve that. Yes. You can sit with them in that and love them and be kind. Right. And you should, because that's who you are, right? Don't sink to that level. Be kind and gracious, but still allow people to surrender, to have their own outcomes.
And sometimes that sounds like just acknowledging, I see that this is really hard for you. Yeah. I see that this is distressing to you. I understand that this is not the outcome that you would have liked, but this is what feels right for me at this time. Yeah. Right. And that's a healthy boundary. And if they continue to revolt against that, then it's like, I'm really not going to be taking any more feedback about this topic, and let's talk about something else.
Yeah. And that's the hard part, honestly, is the enforcement of it, because they do push. They don't like boundaries. If they've been, in this dysfunctional cycle with you all this time, they're going to want you to keep doing what you've been doing. Sure. And so, it is hard. I can remember one of the things that I did toward the end of my marriage was, I don't care what argument he was trying to have with me about whatever it was that day. I just got to where all I would do is just say, I love you too much to argue with you about this. And then I would like to either change the subject or leave the room or leave the house or whatever I had to do to stop the argument. And, I was just a shell of my real self, really, until I chose to take back my life by taking these exact kind of steps that you just named. And here's the thing. I think we would be remiss to not warn people who are listening that this does not happen overnight.
No.
These are little bitty steps that you will take 1,000 times before you will see a single difference. Mm-hmm. And so they're like that snowball rolling down a hill. It's going to take some time to get any weight behind it, you know, but more and more over time, it is going to grow, and you'll slowly shed your codependency and your codependent behaviors. My divorce just happened to be a big part of that shedding of this old self for me, what healed me and strengthened me and allowed me to live immensely more pleasing life post-divorce. And I think a real part of letting go of control is choosing to make healthy changes to eliminate codependency without any way of knowing what those changes are going to do to my partner's choices. And I lived in that for a really long time, and accepting that it could mean that they don't change at all. It could mean that they change for the better. And it could mean that they change for the worse. And it could be all over the place. It could be a little bit of all of that, kind of cyclically and all over chaotically. You know, and if it is that they don't change, or that they do change dramatically or for the worse, that they stay the same or get worse in any way that they show up in the relationship, I just have to know, I think people have to know that divorce is a possibility. You know, when you're trying to make these big changes, I think it's important to acknowledge that you're going to do everything you can to make these changes and allow that to be a positive effect in the relationship. But ultimately, it's a surrender of whatever will be. And I will be okay, whatever happens. And, you know, divorce is just yet another and a final boundary that you may need to set if it goes that way, you know. So I want to believe that that there are also equally happily ending stories of overcoming codependency without having to lose the marital relationship. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do. I did have a client once who was in her 70s and had finally told her husband that she didn't want to eat lunch where they always ate lunch. And it was her first boundary she had ever set. And I was so proud of her. But sometimes it is rocky for a while. Right? As these new ways of communicating are learned. But I think relationships of all kinds, parent-child, spouse relationships can not only be salvaged, but they can thrive. And honestly, when you set a boundary, it then frees the other person to be able to set theirs. Right? You're giving them permission to have a no and a yes, and to really feel it. I have definitely seen couples weather that storm and actually kind of fall in love with a new person. Right. And it's a lot healthier of a relationship for sure.
Very cool. That's good to hear. Well, the thing I do know is that courage and strength come after you do something. Confidence and strength come after you have the courage to do something really hard. And so I think that that's the whole thing in a nutshell, is just do the hard thing and be willing to be okay with whatever the result is, knowing that ultimately it's going to be good no matter which way it goes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know, we're kind of out of time. Is there anything else that you have thoughts on with overcoming codependency?
You bet. Well, I just believe many times codependency is fundamentally driven by a deep fear that if I stop being codependent, find my voice, set healthy boundaries, and take myself off the back burner, the other person will take their love and time and affection away from me, and I will be alone. But as I've said a million times in counseling, any love that is removed when we become healthy was never real to begin with.
Very good.
It was just transactional. I only love you for what you do for me. And that can be a tough pill to swallow.
Absolutely.
Right? That maybe my 25-year marriage has been transactional. That's tough. But fully trusting that we are better off without that kind of love, even if it means we end up divorced, is a real testament to our healing, because there will always be someone else who will love you the way that you deserve to be loved. Always.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for being here. I appreciate everything that you have had to share. And listeners, if you'd like more information and support on ending your codependency through therapy, I would love to make a personal introduction for you to Krystal. So please email me at Annie@startingoverstronger.com. and I will do so. And please visit startingoverstronger.com for more information about divorce and life transition coaching and support groups if divorce is a reality for you right now, or even if it's a potential reality that you want to talk through. I work with clients before, during, and after divorce to make sure that they're addressing all of the different avenues of those decisions. And I founded Starting Over Stronger in 2018 as a certified divorce and life transition coach. And after personally experiencing how ineffectual and limited traditional marriage counseling and divorce support can be. And so I love connecting with people like you who seem to really get it, because I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of, I don't know how I want to put it, but really a lot of struggle to get the kind of support that's needed in the mental health community with regard to not so much, I guess, codependency, maybe as much as toxic personality disorder type relationships. I've seen a lot. I end up with a lot of clients who it was really made worse by therapy, and I hate that. So, you know,
I do too.
Yeah,
I hate that
sure.
for them.
Yeah,
there's a better way.
I'm sure. But, you know, I have that firsthand experience. And so I know that you can heal from codependency and divorce and have a life that's better than you ever imagined. So I want to help you make that a reality in any way that I can. And so thank you again for being here. And remember that you can check in here every Wednesday for a new episode on something that's going to help you as you go through your divorce. So I'll see you again next week with more help as you divorce and hope as you are starting over stronger.